Somewhere in the pages of old cookbooks, there are recipes that quietly disappeared, not because they weren't loved, but because time simply moved on. Dishes once served at family tables, church gatherings, and late-night kitchens now sit forgotten, untouched for decades. But what if those recipes still held stories worth tasting? Today, we're uncovering 10 lost creations that rarely get mentioned, yet carry the flavor of an entire era. From strange combinations to surprisingly clever inventions, each one reveals how people cooked, survived, and celebrated. Stay with me because by the end, you might find yourself craving something you never expected. There was a time when creativity in the kitchen meant using what you had, no matter how unexpected it seemed. One such recipe, quietly printed in mid-century cookbooks, was something few today would believe even existed: Velveeta fudge. At first glance, it sounds like a mistake. In dessert? But in the 1950s and 60s, processed foods were seen as modern miracles. Families trusted them, and brands encouraged home cooks to experiment in ways that now feel almost surreal. Velveeta, known for its smooth, meltable texture, became the secret ingredient in a fudge recipe that promised something different, something silkier. The process itself was simple, almost comforting. Butter melted slowly on the stove, cocoa powder stirred in, followed by a generous block of Velveeta. As it softened, it disappeared into the mixture, leaving behind no trace of its original form. Then came powdered sugar, carefully folded in until the mixture thickened into a rich, glossy mass. What made it so fascinating wasn't just the taste, it was the illusion. You couldn't detect the cheese. Instead, the fudge turned out unbelievably smooth, with a creamy texture that standard recipes often struggled to achieve. It became a quiet favorite at potlucks, where guests would enjoy it first and question it later. But like many experimental recipes of that era, it slowly faded. Changing tastes, health concerns, and a move toward more natural ingredients pushed it out of the spotlight. Still, there's something haunting about it. A recipe that sounds wrong, yet worked perfectly. A reminder of a time when kitchens were places of bold curiosity. And maybe, just maybe, some of those forgotten ideas deserve another taste. Long before clever baking hacks filled the internet, there was a dessert that quietly fooled entire families at the dinner table: tomato soup cake. At first, it sounds like something born from desperation. And in many ways, it was. During the years of economic hardship, particularly around the Great Depression and wartime rationing, home cooks learned to stretch every ingredient. Fresh produce wasn't always available, and sugar, butter, and spices were often limited. But canned goods, especially tomato soup, were reliable, affordable, and always within reach. What no one expected was how perfectly that humble can could transform into something sweet. The soup didn't make the cake taste like tomatoes. Instead, it added moisture and a subtle depth, almost like a spice cake. Mixed with cinnamon, cloves, and a touch of nutmeg, the batter came alive with warmth. Flour, sugar, and a bit of fat brought it together, creating a thick, fragrant mixture that filled the kitchen with a scent no one could quite place. As it baked, something almost magical happened. The sharpness of the tomato softened completely, leaving behind a tender, rich cake that felt comforting and familiar. Many who tasted it for the first time couldn't guess the secret ingredient hidden inside. It was often served plain or topped with a simple frosting, sometimes cream cheese, if available. Families passed the recipe quietly, almost like a trick meant to surprise the next generation. But as fresh ingredients became easier to find and cooking styles shifted, the idea of putting soup into dessert began to feel unnecessary, strange even. And so, it faded into the background. Not because it failed, but because it succeeded too quietly. A cake built on survival, disguised as something ordinary, waiting to be remembered. There was a dessert that didn't just surprise people, it confused them. Served warm from the oven, it looked, smelled, and even tasted like a classic apple pie. But hidden beneath that golden crust was a secret no one expected. There were no apples at all. This was the mock apple pie, a creation that quietly appeared in mid-century kitchens, especially during times when fresh fruit was scarce or too expensive. Instead of apples, the recipe relied on something far more ordinary: crackers. Specifically, buttery crackers were broken into pieces and simmered with sugar, cinnamon, lemon juice, and water. As the mixture cooked, the crackers softened and absorbed the flavors around them. What emerged was something uncanny, a filling that mimicked the texture and taste of spiced apples so closely it fooled even the most skeptical guests. The aroma alone told a convincing story. Warm cinnamon rising from the oven, the sharp hint of lemon cutting through the sweetness, it all felt real. Once poured into a pie crust and baked, the illusion was complete. Sliced and served, it held together just like any traditional apple pie. Families didn't always reveal the truth right away. There was a quiet satisfaction in watching someone take a bite, nod in approval, and only later learn what they had actually eaten. But like many clever substitutions born from necessity, its time slowly passed. As fresh apples became more accessible year-round, the need for imitation faded. The recipe, once a symbol of ingenuity, became a curious relic. Still, there's something unsettling about it. A dessert that isn't what it claims to be, yet convinces you completely. A reminder that sometimes, what we taste isn't always what we think it is. There was a time when dinner tables weren't afraid of combinations that would make people pause today. Some dishes didn't aim to comfort, they aimed to impress. And few recipes captured that better than ham and banana hollandaise. It first appeared in the 1950s and 60s, an era where presentation mattered just as much as taste. Cookbooks encouraged hosts to create meals that felt elegant, even if the ingredients themselves were simple. This dish followed that idea perfectly, taking everyday items and arranging them in a way that felt almost luxurious. The preparation began with ripe bananas, peeled and left whole. Each one was carefully wrapped in slices of ham, creating a contrast that already felt unusual. Then they were placed into a baking dish, lined up neatly, as if part of something more refined than they really were. But the final touch was what defined it. A warm hollandaise sauce, rich with butter, egg yolks, and a hint of lemon, was poured generously over the top. As it coated the ham and bananas, it transformed the entire dish into something that looked undeniably sophisticated. Once baked, the sauce thickened slightly, settling into every layer. The result was a mix of flavors that people didn't quite expect. The sweetness of the banana softened the saltiness of the ham, while the creamy sauce tied everything together. It wasn't meant to be bold, it was meant to feel balanced, even if it seemed strange at first. Guests often reacted with curiosity before taking their first bite. And surprisingly, many found it pleasant. But as decades passed, taste changed. What once felt refined began to feel confusing. The idea of fruit and meat, covered in such a heavy sauce, no longer fit modern expectations. So it quietly disappeared. A dish that once sat proudly at dinner parties, now remembered mostly for the question it leaves behind. Who first thought this would work? There was a time when the way a dish looked mattered just as much as how it tasted. Meals weren't simply served, they were displayed, carefully arranged to impress before the first bite was even taken. And few dishes captured that spirit better than the original 7-layer salad. It wasn't just a salad. It was a centerpiece. Prepared in a deep glass bowl, each ingredient was layered with precision, creating a visible story from bottom to top. First came crisp lettuce, chopped and spread evenly. Then a layer of sweet peas, followed by sliced hard-boiled eggs. After that, a generous sprinkle of shredded cheese, and then crumbled bacon, each layer distinct, untouched by the one above it. But what truly set it apart was the dressing. Instead of being tossed together, a thick layer of mayonnaise was spread carefully across the top, sealing everything beneath it. A touch of sugar was sometimes added, creating a subtle sweetness that balanced the savory ingredients below. The salad was then chilled for hours, allowing the layers to settle without losing their structure. When it was finally served, It felt almost ceremonial. Spoons would cut deep through the layers, revealing the colors and textures hidden beneath the surface. Every scoop delivered a perfect mix, crisp, creamy, salty, and slightly sweet. It became a staple at potlucks, family gatherings, and church dinners. People recognized it instantly, not just for its taste, but for its appearance. It was something you showed off. But over time, the appeal began to fade. Modern cooking leaned toward simplicity, and the idea of a mayonnaise-sealed salad left untouched for hours no longer felt as inviting. Still, there's something memorable about it. A dish built in layers, hiding its full experience until the very last moment, waiting to be uncovered, one spoonful at a time. There was a time when even the simplest ingredients were shaped into something that felt elaborate. Meals weren't just cooked, they were designed. And one dish that quietly reflected this mindset was the tuna noodle ring. At its heart, it was a humble combination. Cooked egg noodles, canned tuna, and a creamy sauce made from pantry staples. But instead of being served in an ordinary dish, it was pressed into a round mold, often a ring pan, transforming it into something that looked far more impressive than its ingredients suggested. The preparation required patience. The noodles were mixed carefully with the tuna and sauce, making sure every strand was coated. Sometimes peas or small vegetables were added, bringing color into the otherwise pale mixture. Then it was packed firmly into the mold, shaped into a perfect circle. As it baked, the edges would begin to set, holding the form together. When it was finally turned out onto a plate, it stood on its own, a complete ring, smooth on the outside, with a hollow center waiting to be filled. And that center was never left empty. Often, a warm sauce or extra tuna mixture was spooned into the middle, creating a contrast between the structured outer ring and the soft filling inside. It wasn't just a meal, it was a presentation. Families served it with a sense of pride. It looked like something that required far more effort than it actually did, and that was part of its charm. But as time passed, the idea of molding food into decorative shapes began to fade. Convenience took over, and dishes became more straightforward, less concerned with appearance. The tuna noodle ring slowly disappeared from tables. Not because it lacked flavor, but because it belonged to a time when even ordinary dinners were meant to feel just a little extraordinary. At one point in American kitchens, even clarity itself became a culinary ambition. Among the most unusual creations to emerge from that era was a dish known as perfection salad. Made with unflavored gelatin, shredded cabbage, carrots, and sometimes celery, it was designed to be transparent, almost jewel-like, as if food had been turned into glass. It was often molded into ornate shapes, served on lettuce leaves, and presented at gatherings where appearance mattered more than appetite. The goal was elegance, a sense of modern sophistication that felt scientific and precise. But the reality was more complicated. Inside that shimmering mold was a sharp contrast of textures and flavors, crunchy vegetables suspended in a slightly sweet, vinegar-like gelatin base. To some, it felt futuristic. To others, unsettling. It blurred the line between salad and dessert, between food and experiment. As decades passed, fresher, simpler salads replaced it, and the molded gelatin style slowly disappeared from everyday meals. But it never fully vanished. It remained in old cookbooks, in faded recipe cards, and in memories of dinners where food looked more like design than nourishment. Today, it stands as a reminder of a time when even a simple salad was shaped by ambition, novelty, and a desire to make the ordinary feel extraordinary. Some dishes feed the body. Others reflect the era that created them, and this one quietly captures both curiosity and discomfort in every molded slice. It is no longer served at most tables, but it still lingers as a symbol of experimental cooking, when appearance and innovation often led the way. And like many forgotten recipes from that time, it leaves behind a quiet question: how far did we go in trying to make food look like something it was never meant to be? A question that still echoes through vintage kitchens, where every molded dish once told a story of ambition and imagination and quiet, lingering curiosity. Among the quieter comforts of mid-century American kitchens, there was a dish that carried both warmth and convenience, especially during busy weeknights and family gatherings. It was known as chicken à la king, served in toast cups, a recipe that turned simple ingredients into something that felt almost restaurant-like at home. The base was straightforward: tender pieces of cooked chicken, often left over from a Sunday roast, mixed into a creamy white sauce. Mushrooms, peas, and sometimes diced pimentos were added, creating small bursts of flavor and color. Everything was gently simmered until thick, rich, and smooth. But what made it memorable wasn't just the filling, it was the presentation. Slices of bread were carefully pressed into muffin tins and baked until crisp, forming small edible cups. These golden toast cups became the perfect vessel, holding the creamy chicken mixture without falling apart. When filled, they looked elegant, almost like something served at a formal luncheon. It was a dish built on practicality. Nothing went to waste, and yet the final result felt intentional and refined. Families served it at gatherings, dinner parties, and holiday tables, where it often stood alongside more elaborate dishes. There was a quiet satisfaction in breaking into the crisp toast and watching the warm filling spill slightly onto the plate. It was simple, but comforting in a way that felt deeply familiar. Over time, as cooking became faster and more modern, dishes like this slowly faded. Pre-made options replaced careful assembly, and presentation lost some of its charm. Still, chicken à la king in toast cups remains a reminder of a time when even leftovers could be transformed into something that felt special, thoughtful, and just a little bit celebratory. There was a period in American home cooking when convenience met imagination in the most unexpected ways, and few recipes reflect that better than the once popular perfection salad's savory cousin, the molded gelatin dinner trend, especially dishes like aspic-based vegetable molds and cold meat salads. These creations were built around unflavored gelatin, which became widely available in the early 20th century. At the time, it represented modern science entering the kitchen, something precise, clean, and almost futuristic. Home cooks were encouraged to set their meals into firm, glossy shapes that could be sliced and served with clean edges. Inside these molds, anything could be suspended: diced carrots, peas, celery, chopped eggs, and even small bits of chicken or ham. The ingredients floated in a clear, trembling structure that caught the light like glass. Often, lemon juice or vinegar was added to give it a sharp, refreshing contrast. The preparation was careful and deliberate. Everything had to be arranged before the gelatin set, almost like composing a still life. Once chilled, the mold was turned out onto a serving plate, revealing a perfect, shimmering dome of preserved ingredients. At gatherings, these dishes were meant to impress. They looked advanced, modern, even elegant, symbols of a kitchen that had embraced innovation. But reactions were often mixed. Some admired the creativity, while others found the texture and appearance unsettling, especially when meat was involved. As food culture shifted toward fresher, less structured dishes, molded gelatin meals gradually disappeared from everyday tables. The idea of suspending dinner in a clear, jiggling form began to feel outdated. Yet they remain frozen in time, preserved in old cookbooks and faded photographs. A reminder of an era when even dinner was shaped by science, patience, and a belief that food could be transformed into something almost otherworldly. By the time mid-century America reached its peak of convenience cooking, dinner tables had already seen their fair share of unusual creations. But few were as straightforward, and yet as strangely memorable as the humble hot dog pie. At first glance, it sounds like something thrown together without thought. And in a way, that's exactly what made it so popular. It was a working family solution, quick, filling, and built entirely from affordable ingredients that were easy to keep on hand. The base often started with a simple biscuit or pastry crust, pressed into a pie dish. Inside, sliced hot dogs were layered with onions, beans, or even canned vegetables depending on what was available. A creamy or tomato-based sauce was poured over the filling, binding everything together into a soft, savory mixture. Once baked, the crust turned golden while the filling thickened into something hearty and comforting. It wasn't refined, and it didn't try to be. Instead, it focused on practicality, stretching a small amount of meat into a full family meal. For many households, especially during busy or financially tight times, it became a dependable option. Children recognized it immediately. Adults appreciated its simplicity. It was the kind of dish that didn't require questions, just serving plates and a hungry table. But like many recipes from that era, its popularity faded as tastes evolved. Fresh ingredients, lighter meals, and more diverse cooking styles slowly replaced it. What once felt clever and resourceful began to feel overly basic. Still, hot dog pie remains a snapshot of its time. A reminder that comfort food didn't always need complexity. Sometimes it was just about making something warm, filling, and familiar out of whatever was available, and sharing it without hesitation. And just like that, we step out of a kitchen that no longer exists the same way. 10 recipes that once filled family tables, holiday gatherings, and quiet weeknight dinners, now left behind in fading cookbooks and forgotten memories. Some were strange, some were clever, and some were born out of pure necessity, but all of them tell the same story: people trying to make the most of what they had. If you enjoyed uncovering these lost flavors of the past, don't forget to stay connected for more hidden stories from old American kitchens. Subscribe because the next forgotten recipe might surprise you even more.